Hi, I'm Jamie Tucker with the Acts Network. You know, when we're in church on Sunday mornings, it's sometimes easy for us to forget about all of the people who aren't in church. George Barna showed us in 2004 that roughly 53% of all Americans never, or at least rarely, go to any worship service of any kind. Have you ever wondered why that is? Sure you have. Well, this week we're taking a look at the attitudes of the unchurched toward church, Christians, and God. It's this week's Greatest Story Never Told.
Well, I'm a preacher's kid. Yeah, classic preacher's kid. I was forced to go to church as a child, and now that I don't have to go to church, I don't.
People who don't go to church have their reasons, but just what are those reasons, really? That's a good question, and one that few people have ever really taken a close look at. Just recently, LifeWay Christian Resources released the findings of a study they did looking at the attitudes of the unchurched toward the church, Christians, and God. And what they found was pretty eye-opening. 72% say they believe God or some type of supreme being exists, but they have little understanding about exactly what they believe. 61% believe the God of the Bible is no different from the gods of other religions, such as Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. That's interesting, since Buddhism doesn't have a God. 71% believe Jesus makes a positive difference in a person's life. Now, to discuss these findings, I talked with Ed Stetzer, senior researcher at LifeWay, who headed up the survey.
There's a sense that, yeah, we believe in God, but he's kind of a big guy in the sky. I call it the Oprahization of American spirituality. It's just, as long as you're spiritual, believe in something, it's okay. And they believe that. 72% indicated that they believed in God, but about the same number indicated that they thought the church was full of hypocrites. They either somewhat agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. That's a pretty strong rebuke to us. And a high number felt that the church was more about organized religion. Christianity is more about organized religion than it was about loving God and loving people. I think that's a challenge to us, that the unchurched have negative perceptions about the church, but not about God. And we need to make sure that we share with them about who Christ is so they can meet him personally and change all those perceptions.
Another interesting finding is that although unchurched people think Christians are a bunch of hypocrites, they don't think Christians talk enough about their faith.
I mean, they were a vast majority said that I'd be willing to talk about spiritual things, about Christianity, that Jesus makes a positive difference in a person's life. They must just not think he is. But they're very open to have those conversations. And that was a big takeaway from this study, is they may like Jesus, at least they understand they like Jesus, don't like the church, but they're very open to Christians, and almost 90% of them say they have a close friend who considers himself or herself a Christian. It's a huge misperception that people don't want to hear you talking about it. Clearly, the study shows from unchurched people, this isn't just anybody, but these are people who don't go to church, say, I'd be very open to hear about it, and not only that, I'd welcome, in some cases, such a conversation.
So if unchurched people don't hear enough about Christ from believers, where do they get these perceptions about Christians in the church? And what do Christians do about it?
You can't watch television today, Jamie, and see a TV show with a positively depicted Christian. And so there's a perception that culture creates. Yeah, we may feed into it, but there's a perception that culture creates. And I think the way we overcome that is let them see lives lived, changed by the power of the gospel in their neighbors and their friends and their coworkers, who then tell them about Jesus. We ought not to be afraid. We ought to go tell them because they're open to hear it, particularly when it's from a life lived by a Christ follower.
And you can learn more about the study and the findings on our website. That's actsnetwork.com, actsnetwork.com. And feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions as well. And as Ed said, don't miss an opportunity this week to talk about your faith with a close friend. They're wanting you to, and it may be the only conversation they ever have about God. That's this week's Greatest Story Never Told. I'll see you next time.